*6 to unmute.
All right, good morning everyone and welcome to the DataSet Community June webcast. This month we have Chris Kraus here with us to talk about what's new in ZA Continuous Application Insight 8.0.2. As a reminder, if you have any questions along the way, please enter them into the Q&A box in the WebEx in the lower right-hand corner, and Chris will respond to them as he's able. That's it for me. Take it away, Chris.
Okay. So, hi everyone. Cool thing about live demos is my Lisa license on our remote server expired this morning, and therefore I panicked. I'm like, nothing's working, nothing working. It only took me 20 minutes to debug that. So I dismantled and remantled my environment very quickly. So what we're going to talk about today is Application Insight. So it was formerly known as Pathfinder, and I thought it was kind of interesting. As part of our new C Agile, which was very Scrum-based, and going to the SAFe framework, they asked us to have a vision statement. So a vision statement for Continuous Application Insight pretty much looks like this. CA Continuous Application Insight provides visibility into the transactions for understanding implementations and defect triage and testing and virtual service generation. The generation of these tests and virtual services allow customers to more rapidly regress their applications, build automated tests, increase the quality of the release, and implement these features as a shift left in the development lifecycle. So I thought that was kind of interesting just to put out there so people kind of remember how we're supporting the application lifecycle. In this webinar, what we wanted to go over is kind of remind you what was in 8.0 and then show you the 2 new features we launched in 8.02. And then these features are being built on in our next release, 8.1, which is coming out within the next week. And then what you'll notice is we're trying to do about monthly drops of code, expanding on features and giving you more rich validation of the application itself. So with 8.0, that's when we moved to the new web portal. So the nice thing is we were able to move everything from the old web UI or the workstation UI into the new portal. So that gave us the ticket workflow generation, the new find defects, the new DocGen workflow, and the remote calibration of agents. So there was one thing that did not get ported, and that was basically the generation of data sets or RR pairs from the old UI. Now the old UI was kind of interesting. It allows you to like manipulate and try to capture XML files and move them back and forth, but there was no easy way to create an action with those. Okay, so I'm going to show you we've kind of rethought that, and we've added that functionality in the 8.02 release, and we've also added functional test generation from the DocGen workflows. With our customers we've taken this to, they're really enjoying and finding that they have kind of 2 types of tests they want to generate. One is atomic baseline tests, so individual functions that they're running. Others are, hey, I've logged into a mobile device, I'm on a mobile web page, or maybe a web page in my browser, or it could even be a fat client like the ATM machine, and I'm traversing multiple services, and they need to be replayed in the same order to create a functional test, because the ordering of the API calls and the data sharing across them is very important. So the 2 features I'm going to show you is the functional test generation and the dataset generation. So these are net new for 8.02. We'll be doing another one of these when 8.1 goes GA, and we'll talk about a couple new features. One is enhancements on our generation, and one is a new feature there. So I'm going to live on the edge, and now from the quick start, share my desktop. And of course, Firefox wants to update. So you may notice there's a small change to the UI up here. We've got a current project window and some administrator things. So I'm going to start with dataset generation. So when we look at analyze transactions, I've got a whole bunch of different transactions that have happened over the day, right? But if I've, say, logged into the Lisa Bank and manipulated multiple things, or I've been in Lisa Cars and I've manipulated multiple things, what I really want to do in some cases, is create a test case that mirrors the API calls that are driven from the website itself. So document transactions was created specifically to help us understand how the flow of a, say, manual test case is happening from a mobile device or from the UI, hitting multiple things in the background. So what we did in the first version was we allowed you to provide the endpoint that's making the requests. In this case, I've got a browser on my machine. It's making requests over to a server. This could be the IP address of a mobile device or anything like that. And what we did is we started documenting the transactions. We'll see here's an enhancement. I'm going to log in as admin. And I'm going to say add a user. So now, as I'm making each one of these calls from the UI, different things are happening in the background. I'm able to actually make, say, SOAP calls or REST calls into the background, and they are being captured by our agents running in the Java application server. So the intent of document transactions was to actually show us what was happening in the background and understand them, so we could then better, say, figure out how to test something or how to work with something. Okay. So I'll finish my manipulations. If I come back to my portal, what we see is we have different web pages that were running transactions, and we're basically using the IP address of the client. In this case, it's the browser making these calls, and then we're designating a name for this. So this means that you could say launch this recorder, and you could be running a mobile device or somewhere else. You just need to know the IP address that's making the client calls, and we're going to start capturing all this good information, putting it together. Okay? So this was available in the 8.0 release. So I'll save this. Now the net new feature is we found that customers want to actually generate a test case below the user interface or making calls to the APIs below this. So in the previous release, we could share the link, we could delete the recording. Now we have something called generate baseline. So what this does is allows me to create a baseline test case that will replay the API calls below the user interface. Now we have a couple options here. There's parameterization level. So what this means is if you have REST calls or JSON data, we will see the output of one step and correlate it to the input in the next step. So this means that, you know, if I add a user, say, and then get back a primary key from the database of a new login credentials or new ID, and those things get used over and over in the next test steps, we actually will generate the test case and parameterize those. So in the 8.02 version, this will work for JSON and REST calls. You'll see with our next iteration that comes out at the end of the week, we'll be supporting XML also. We had the concept of magic dates, so we can actually correlate data coming in or dates and time shift them for you. And when I create, what will happen is this test case will look very different from the test cases that you've seen in the past. This is more of a functional test case, because what will happen is we will actually see multiple steps being generated that are correlated to each other. So I'm going to open up my workstation. So you can see here now, my test is actually a series of steps. Where traditional baselines was one atomic API, we consider this more of a functional test case because we actually need to carry on all the calls in this release a test that were observed in the user interface here. Okay. So now the next thing we did is we actually created some database validation because classic testing is that we want to show things like invoke and verify. So if I added a user to the bank, if I added a address to the user as I did, what I would want to do is not only create the test case, but I'd want to verify at the database layer that the right things happened. So what we're actually doing here is, you can see here, this is the add address call. So we got the user, we added the address and listed the users. So if I look at this database call here, okay, oops, sorry, it's taking me a second. We ended up with some insert statements to add users into the system to create the user account. So what this means is we are looking at the SQL statements across the calls, and we're going to look for insert statements to see where data has been inserted. We're going to look for update statements where you've altered things, and we'll look at delete statements. And what this is going to allow us to do is actually create a SQL statement to validate the system of record for you. So whenever we see at the database layer a insert, update, or delete, we want to create a coordinated Lisa test case that validates at that next layer. So you can see the difference here is now we did the create user call, but now there was an insert into the database. So if you look here, we had insert users, and there was the first name, last name, and the usernames into the database. This was the actual SQL statement that Continuous Application Insight observed. And now we have a SQL statement we'll select for that specific user to make sure it exists in their system of record, and then we have an assertion validating the row count that we actually got back one row. Okay. Same thing happened when I added the address for the user. We had a SQL statement that was done to insert the address, and then this will select it and verify. So you'll see next month when we show the new features, I'll be doing this against a 3-tiered architecture, our new forward cars application. So even if you have a web, say an ESB like Mule in the middle, and then a lower level doing database updates, those 3 layers of the application will map them and will create the database validation for you. So in 8.02, this is our first version of this. The SQL statements are a little bit hard-coded, you can see. This ID is actually hard-coded here. What will happen is in the next release, you'll notice that that ID was actually created inside of this step, or the username is created here. We're going to start correlating the output of one step into the input of the next step. So in this release, kind of following the idea that we want to get the first version out so people can look at it, start playing with it, and then you can actually modify a couple fields and add a filter manually to make your test case run. We'll actually do a better job of parameterizing those. So remember, we're doing monthly releases, trying to iterate and get this functionality out into your hands as fast as possible. Okay. So that's what's new with the document transactions and generating a functional test. The second thing I want to show you is we're going to look at DataSet Generation. So easiest thing for me to do is run a merge of some transactions. So I've run all these transactions this morning, and basically what I did is I went into forward cars, and I ran some car lookups and some inventory searches like this. And every time I do that lookup on the inventory, I'm running different VIN numbers, right? So the idea is if I have in my forward cars, I have an inventory server, a VIN lookup server, a loan application server, I may want to actually do some virtualization of one of those servers itself. So say I look at the car transaction here. I have my web server here. It is making REST calls to look into inventory. It's being processed by the ESB and going into the backend system to pull the inventory of cars, right? So we have a 3-tiered architecture here. And if I want to, say, test this inventory server without driving the transactions from the web, I would actually be very interested in getting a data set of all of these lookups for this inventory that happened here. So since I did a merge transactions, what happened is I ended up with 9 transactions. So I'll just go grab all those. Now, what we classically would do is say, how about go generate a test case to generate a virtual service at this point. But we can actually do something a little bit different. What we may want to do is say get a data set, and then we could actually manually manipulate that in a test case ourselves or load them into a virtual service. Okay? So you can see this. There's more examples of this within our application server where I'd want to separate two layers of the application, right? So hopefully you're starting to get used to these cars and demos themselves. In 8.02, the new feature is to create the RR pairs from shelved frames. So when I do this, what happens is I can actually generate a data set that can be used in the API testing in the new portal, or we move the VSCZ over into the new portal and create a virtual service. So remember, this agent is in the context of lots of other transactions itself, but I'm going to click download here. Oops. Okay, I messed up that one. Let me go back into my shelf, clear my shelf. Let me refresh my query. There we go. Grab those. I'm going to grab these REST calls. Put them like live demos. I'm going to say I'm going to create a data set for this. Well, what happened? Okay, I messed up my database, but that's okay. Good thing about live demos is we always keep transactions sitting around. Okay, so what I did from this morning is I was able to download a zip file of all the request response pairs for my history and my car shopping. So if I look here, these REST request response pairs look mysteriously like what you would create if you were, say, building a virtual service from sample files. So what we've done is we've enhanced Continuous Application Insight and taught it how to create sample REST calls, sample, say, SOAP data, even say JMS or MQ data. So why would I want to create my virtual service from these raw samples versus just putting them onto the shelf and then clicking create transactions and create baselines? Well, there's one thing that we can do when we have the raw files. When we come in, we can actually use the virtualize from RR pairs, and the one thing that it will do for us is it will let me say use HTTP or use a VRS file. So if you have data chaining, and so you need to, say, recursively run a JSON request on it, or you need to extract something from, say, a SOAP XML element and take that data and reprocess it a second time, or JMS, you now have the ability to extract the raw files and then associate the generation with the VRS file. The cool thing is you can do this completely from the web console and not have to bring in the workstation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my request response pairs and drop them in. So here's all my samples. I'm going to say it's called demo123, loaded into VSC. I'm going to deploy. Okay, so I got a port number here, so I'm going to grab this URL here, because that's going to be helpful later. Control C. And if I look at my dev test console, I can see demo123 is now deployed and running. Now, I'm going to come over to the API test. So the cool thing about API test is it has that same concept of I want to create an API test from different sample files. So if you need sample files, the assumption is you could actually cut and paste them into here, or I can say provide my URL, and I'm going to use the quick link and say give it from zip files versus give it from the existing RRs. Zip files just tend to be easier for me. Oops. And I'm going to grab my zip file. I'm going to drag it in. It's extracted the pairs for me. I'm going to say import. So now I have a REST test case that's going to go invoke all of the virtual services I generated. So I've got a name, I've got the URL. I did cheat and I copied that, so with the port number that VS create from RR pairs generated automatically. I can create and run. And in this one, I know that 3/4 of them will pass, a couple of them will fail because of some data anomalies that I need to go do XML exclusions on. So this will start running now. So the idea is we're trying to make sure that it's super easy to build your API tests and build your virtual services. So we're very happy that we can use, just put it on the shelf and use the data detector framework to generate your virtual services. But if you have, say, JMS messages and you need to have some complex, say, copybook processing on them, or some custom generic XML parser, the GXPP, where you're not using basically the SOAP, the REST, or the generic XML default parser, you can now generate those by using the virtualized RR pairs and providing a VRS file. Okay, and then you can generate your complementary tests over here. So if you do not want to use the baseline tests we generate and want to use the new virtualized website HTTP, you now have the ability to just drop those RR pairs into here, and then all the formats are correct. So we're supporting in our RR pair generation HTTP, so that's SOAP, REST, just posts and gets. We can also do it for JMS messages and MQ messages. So that's going to be super powerful when you get into complex data handling. So in the future, we'll probably see some merging of the workflows once the data detector framework is enhanced in the VSC, say our recording from website, where you actually can manipulate the UI to, say, change your REST calls or add a chaining and use the request data manager or request data copier. As those things start showing up in the new portal UI, we'll move our workflow and our shelf to move into those. But for now, since they're not there, what we're giving you is a very easy way to generate those from VRS files. I like to call them recipe files because I don't have to understand what's in them. I just apply them, and I can generate very complex virtual services. Okay. There's one more thing that we can do in here, which is very handy, is on the create a large data set. So see here this LDS and our R pairs. So if I go to create an LDS for this, what that means is instead of having to create a baseline test and then regenerate the baseline test every time my data changes, I can just regenerate the LDS step. So that means that if I've customized my test case, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to regenerate the large data set. I'm going to say create. Yep, not getting good frames there. And so what will happen is in the dataset directory over here in your, we'll start getting new data sets loaded into here. So we don't have to worry about if I've modified my test, I've added new access control or modified my test, I don't have to worry about wiping them out. I can just regenerate the data for those data-driven test cases. Okay. So that's everything I wanted to show in the demo. And I'm going to start looking in the chat window to see what questions we have. Okay. So how does this compare to Wiley Interscope or the new name for something previously existing? Okay. So Wiley Interscope is now APM, and you have the enterprise dashboard. So the big difference is APM agents tend to be deployed in production or maybe low performance labs. They're going to give you the transaction times, so how long something took, but they're not necessarily going to give you the details of all the payload. So traditionally, APM is very fast because they don't deal with payload data. What they do is they show you just what's happening at the call level. Now, we do capture some response time data, so you see this call took 195 seconds, this took 189 seconds. And in the future, you'll see us start doing some more with those response times. The big thing is we are actually capturing the full payload of these requests and these responses. So our agents are heavier in the in what's happening because we are actually going through and capturing all the data. This would be the equivalent of activating a tracer for an agent, maybe of an HTTP tracer or a JMS tracer, where you're capturing the full payload data. Now, we do know that, as exceptions happen, they dial up and dial down, and we're looking at some new integrations with them. But think about our agent as heavier weight because we're capturing the full payload and the full request response. Where APM agents are just saying this method was called or this SOAP endpoint was called and this is a response time. Okay. So can this be integrated with SOI to define services? So I'm not sure what SOI means. So I need, if someone can type in there what SOI means, service orchestration or something like that. I'm not sure. Okay. Okay. So we'll open up for any more questions. Those came through the chat window. Let me see if there's anything in the Q&A window. Oh, CA Service Operations Insight. Okay. We've got on our long-term roadmap, so that's our, say, 6 to 18-month roadmap, to look at integrations with more integrations with APM, like tracer-type data, still looking at the Layer 7 to see what happens inside of there, and then looking at some of the other monitoring tools from CA around the network sniffing and that. So everything on our roadmap, we do have existing roadmap items. They're in the 12, 18-month time frame to actually do more where anywhere a CA product is getting payloads, we're capturing that data and then pushing it back so we can actually work with that data itself. Okay. Okay. Someone asked, can you please show how the agent is set up on the server? Okay, sure. So what I have is I have two machines running here. I have, in this case, my Mac, and I'm running all of the Lisa components over here. So I'm running my registry and all of my coordinators and simulators, all these guys over here on this machine. On a remote Windows box here, what I'm doing is I'm running the CARS demo environment here. So what I've done in this CARS environment is I've deployed a Lisa agent. So you can see I'm starting the CARS, and I get this command here that says dev test agent is started. On the Carlone server, it's a Windows box, and there's a JVM, and it's pointing back to my Mac as the agent itself. So what I did here is the same thing you would do for any web server. So it could be like a Jetty web server, or I have a my build. And I have this one line here. So this line here, Java agent, and I point to my inside agent. Name is CARS ESB with the URL. So this URL, this 10.139.4.101.209, or sorry, 2009, this is my server where I've got my broker running, my registry, and all those good things. and all I've done is I've pointed to the inside agent, and I've given a name of cars ESB. I did the same thing for my car loan. So my startup parameters, so my JVM arguments, this is where I'm setting my memory and my permgen. I've actually pointed to my agent. Now the trick is, notice I'm using the agent jar, right? So if you're familiar with traditional Pathfinder in the past, we, I'll show you, we had the Lisa agent, the Lisa agent DLL, and Lisa agent 2.jar. There is a new jar in here called the inside agent, and this came out in 8.0. What this does is this is a preloading agent to these other two. So one of the complaints we had from a customer is they said, I have 18 app servers out there, and I've put the Lisa agent in them. Now, every time I go to upgrade, I need to copy the agent to that machine and then bounce the server. And many times what I do is I copy it out there, and as the servers naturally get bounced, the new versions get pulled up. So what we've done is we've made the configuration of the agent a little bit easier because it's in the web console. The other thing is, if you're pointing to the inside agent versus the Lisa agent, when you have a new version of the agent available, what will happen is you will get a download button over here to say you can actually upgrade that agent. Okay, so if I were to go into my my lib core upgrade folder and place a new agent inside of there, I could actually have the Lisa architecture, or sorry, the continuous application insight architecture dynamically push the new agent out for me to do upgrades that. So that's the that's why I've done it here. So I'm always pointing to the new inside agent. So as I get new versions, I can just drop them into the libcore agent upgrade folder, and then it will get identified, and it will then allow the agent to be remotely downloaded on my behalf. So if you need to know how to install the agent, the quickest thing to do is run into the wiki.ca.com, hit dev test, spelled correctly. Now in the installing and the agents, you'll see we have examples of how to install the Java agent and the mainframe and the LPAR agent. So when you go into the Java agent area, we'll give you that sample line to put into there and how to actually connect it. So the startup strings are actually inside of here. So we give you examples for specific platforms, whether it's the SAP, the JBoss, the Jetty, or how to do it with the generic JVM. So it's documented here, and this will tell you how to do those type of things. And there you go. There's a sample of the Java options file, and that's literally what I put into my forward cars startup in my right here. Cool. Options Q&A. Okay. Okay, High-Growth till 7.1 Lisa agent only for Java apps only. It's just changed in 8.0. Okay, so right now we still only support Java. We're supporting Java 1.5, 1.6, 1.7. We're doing our due diligence. We're working on support for Java 1.8. There's a point solution where if you're running Windows IIS and you're running ERP Connect, which is a third-party client that allows you to make RFC calls and IDOT calls to SAP. A lot of people use that when they're building custom applications in front of SAP. We actually have a .NET agent that will deploy into that environment, but the scope of testing was only done around testing of ERP Connect. We've pushed out to our pre-sales organization asking what people are interested in .NET. We've had a poll up for about 4 months in the communities, and it seems that from what we've seen so far, database virtualization is what most people are interested in, and we've had one customer express interest in building baseline tests for web services. So we're not seeing a lot of lift, and we've pushed this question out over and over again. So at this point, it's Java. We do have one protocol tested for .NET, which is specifically ERP Connect under IIS. Okay. We'll look for any other questions.
Thanks, Chris. Are there any other questions, everybody? If so, please put them in the Q&A box, and I'll assign them to Chris so he can answer them.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem like there are any, so I guess, Chris, if you're done, I guess we can wrap up.
Okay, so there's one quick question. Does CA capture network packets? No. What we do is we sit inside the application server, and we sit like the HTTP listener layer. So we see the data once it's been processed by the JVM for, say, JMS or MQ. We sit at the job layer also, so as the messages come into the JVM, we sit there. So we're not a packet sniffer. So the layer 7 firewall, and there's other tools at CA which actually sit at the packet layer and sniff that. For us, we're looking at think of it the listeners and the Java application server. All right. Okay, there we go. So I think I've got all the questions answered.
Oh, no, it looks like there's a follow-up, Chris.
So I do not have the mainframe agent turned on in this environment. So we can do that as a separate call, or I'll just follow up on that one.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate the time, and thanks everybody for joining us. We will go ahead and wrap up for today, and I will get this. We'll get this replay posted in the community later this afternoon. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
The leader has disconnected. The conference will be terminated in 5